So welcome to this webinar on unassisted passenger lists in the New South Wales State Archives collection. Also known as free settlers, unassisted passengers were those people who paid their own way to New South Wales. Before 1826, very few lists of free passengers arriving in Sydney have survived. This webinar focuses on the records of unassisted passenger arrivals to Sydney between the years 1826 and 1922. There's just a couple of things to remember when you're doing research into these records. Remember that before 1854, many passengers are not listed by name, and overall, information recorded about passengers when it is available is quite limited. So it could just be the surname or Mr. and Mrs. Smith and children rather than any more detailed information. And finally, that the lists are arranged by the date of arrival into Sydney. So there's two main series of records that we discuss when we talk about unassisted passenger records, and the first of these, the reports of vessels arrived, which cover the years 1826 to 1859. These don't show the names of all the individuals on board the ship. Usually what you'll see is the name of the captain or the master, and you'll see the names of the cabin passengers. So in this example here, we have lists of the cabin passengers and we've got the name of the master of the ship, which is Barnes. It also tells us that the ship came from San Francisco, sailed on the 14th of November 1849, arriving in Sydney on the 6th of February 1850. If I turn the page, there is a second page for these lists quite often called the Health Officer's Report. So this was a report that was given to the health officer in port by the surgeon and the master on board the ship, and they needed to provide details of how many people were on the board of the ship and whether there were any diseases and if anyone had passed away. So that can be quite useful if you're looking for further information about other people who may have been on the ship or the kind of voyage that it might have had. This one looks like it was fairly uneventful. The latest series of passenger lists we call unassisted passenger lists, and these cover the years 1854 to 1922. This is an example from 1909 of the ship called the Paluna, which sailed from Hobart to Sydney, arriving in January 1909. So on this list, you can see that the crew are listed in some detail. We get their names, their ages, where they were born, and their station or their occupation. So the first person, of course, there is the master, and then they go through all the occupations on board the ship. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see a list of the saloon passengers, and you can see that the information is quite limited to the initial of the person's name and their surname. And then sometimes as you go through the list, perhaps on this second page, which I'll show you now, you might just see less details as well. So all we're getting here is the Mr. and the Mrs. And over on the very right there, you can see Mrs. Buckney and 2 children. And this is not uncommon. So how do you find unassisted passengers? We'd suggest, if you can, starting with the death certificate. A death certificate can show you the length of time that someone was in the colony. Of course, remembering that death certificates are only as good as the information to hand by the informant at the time. So if the informant didn't know the person very well, the information may not be terribly accurate. But they will often show that someone had been in the colony for 2 years or 35 years or whatever, and so that can give you a ballpark time of where to start looking. The next thing to do might be to check available indexes on our website, which is records.nsw.gov.au. There's also another resource called Mariners and Ships in Australian Waters, which is a website called marinersandships.com.au, and this is free for all people to access. There's the Ancestry website, and then there's also the National Library of Australia's Trove website, trove.nla.gov.au, where you will find newspapers of the days, and shipping arrivals were often reported and may include lists of passengers, so they can be quite useful. So the first thing we're going to do is just flick over to our website. Fingers crossed we can do this without pain. There we are. I'll just check you can see what I am looking at. Very good. Just checked. You can see what I can see. Okay, so on our website, which is records.nsw.gov.au, if we scroll down, we'll come to our link for immigration and shipping. From here, what I'm going to do today is click on the indexes link, and I'm going to scroll down to our unassisted immigrants index. If I click on the link here at the title, I will go to this page, which gives me some details about the index, including abbreviations used in the index. So P for passenger, SMH for Sydney Morning Herald, SGT for the Sydney Gazette, and Sydney General Trade List. Now, if I click on Search the Index, it will take me straight to the index search screen. Now, I'm going to enter the name Cohen as a surname in here, and I'll come up with lots of hits for that name. I can see there's 14 pages of hits here. So I can narrow down my search, and you can see if you look at the names that there's not always a lot of detail that can help you identify your particular Cohen. So there's Mr., there's Mrs.'s, lots of Mr.'s, Samuel's, Mr. I'm going to enter a name. Whoops, can't spell. Abraham Cohen. And I can see there's 2 entries for 2 Abraham Cohens there. So we've got one on the ship the Union from San Francisco, arriving in February 1850, and I can see there's also a mention of that in the Sydney Morning Herald. The other thing I can do, if I just delete his name, is I can also narrow down my search by the year, and then that gives me less Cohens to look through. But I've got the date of the ship of arrival, I've got the real number if I wanted to go and look at that on microfilm, and I've got the name of the ship as well, and also where the ship came from. So all of those things can be clues as to where I need to look. The next thing that we're going to do is look at another index on our website. So we'll just go back to where we were, and we're going to just check the vessels arrived in Sydney. So this is an index to ships coming into Sydney and the dates that they arrived. So many ships arrived a number of times, and so it can be helpful to know the exact day that a ship comes in because the passenger lists are arranged by day. So if you know the name of the ship but not when it actually arrived, this is the index for you. So again, we click on Search the Index, and this time I'm going to put a ship name in, hit enter. This time I've got 16 pages of hits. I'm going to narrow that down by just asking it to look for 1 year. I now have 3 pages of hits. Now if I want to look at all of those pages on the one screen, I can do that by just clicking a higher number and then getting everything on one screen, like so, but everything's a bit out of order. I can export that to Excel, and in Excel I can just manipulate that data so I can sort it in different ways. So here's my Excel spreadsheet. I can go to Sort and Filter, Custom Sort. I'm going to sort by month just to get myself in month order there. I'm going to go to a custom list, and I'm going to get it to do month orders like so. Click on OK, and now everything's in month order, not day order, but just month order, and that will help me work it out. And I'm sure that there's many more Excel experts out there who can do more trickier sorts than myself, but that would do as a start. So we'll go back to the website here, and now what we're going to do is take a look at the next resource. So this is Mariners and Ships in Australian Waters. This has been put together by a lady called Marianne Warner, my apologies, and she's been helped by a lot of volunteers over the years. So not State Archives volunteers, but volunteers that have been working with Marianne to get this website up and running. And what they've done is they've digitised shipping lists from the New South Wales State Archives collection, unassisted passenger lists, I should say, from the years 1845 to 1922. And as well as the digitised list, they've also included a transcription of that list. So it's still ongoing. They're still working on the years in the early 20th century. But so far, they've listed over 92,000 vessels, over 3,400,000 crew, and over 3 million passengers. So I quite like to use this by browsing this website. So this is very helpful when you know the name of the ship and you know the date that it came in. So for our Union example, I can go straight to February 1850. I can look for the 6th of February 1850. This is a page that shows all the ships coming in that month. If I click on the Union, then I see a transcription of all the passengers on board that ship, including Abraham Cohen. And then if I click down here, I can see a copy of that passenger list, which is the same one we saw earlier today. And then if I click on the second scan there, I can see a scan of the health officer's report that went with it. So that's magic. This is freely available on the internet. You don't need to pay to do this. You can do this from home. And now we'll have a look at a later example. So we go back to the years, and Marianne's put on this page everything up to 1879. And then if I follow this link over here, I can see all the lists from 1880 up to 1922. Where there's an asterisk, it means they're still working on those months. So you can see getting through the 1910s, there are still quite a few lists that they're working on. But if I go back to January 1909, again, we've got a list of all of the ships coming in. And if I scroll down to the end here, we can click on the ship there, the Paulina. Again, we see a transcription of all the crew and passengers on board that ship. And then if I click on scan, I can view a digital copy of that passenger list here. And if I click on the second page, I can see the second page here. The other thing that you can do on this website is search for a name. This can be less or more successful, but I'll show you an example. So I've got the name Garrigues. I don't know that Smith would be a very useful name to search just because there'd be so many, but if it was a more uncommon name, it might be a bit easier. So here we've got firstly where Garrigues might come up as the name of a ship, and then secondly down here we've got names of ships where that name pops up in the list of transcriptions. So this first example here, we've got the Polynesian. If I do Control F just to quickly look through that list, I can see that name there. So our Garrigues is a steward from France. He's a crew, obviously, on board the ship the Polynesian, which came from Noumea to Sydney in 1909. And there are quite a few passengers there as well. And here's that passenger list. Just magic. Now, just to let you know as well that our passenger lists, our unassisted passenger lists, have been digitised and indexed on the Ancestry website. And although this is a subscriber website, so you do have to pay if you access this from home, many public libraries and we in our reading room do offer free access to members of the public to access Ancestry. And here again, you can search the passenger lists by the name of the passenger or by the name of the ship or by the year of arrival. The last thing that we're going to do today is have a look at Trove, which is the National Library of Australia's website where they have been digitising newspapers and government gazettes and putting photographs and pictures and things up online. Today, we're going to just look at the digitised newspapers. We're going to stick with our example of Abraham Cohen. So I'm going to put Abraham Cohen Union, which is the name of the ship, 1850. Click on search. I like to keep things very basic. And then I'm going to just narrow down the Trove search to an issue date of that year only. And then I can see here the first thing is the Sydney Morning Herald, 7th of February 1850, shipping intelligence arrival. And here we are. We've got a report of the Union arriving. Captain Barnes from San Francisco left there on the 14th of November, which we knew from us viewing that list before. Went via the Sandwich Islands in December. Lord Howe Island, which I didn't know, in January, and it gives us a list of the passengers on board that ship. And one thing you could do is compare the newspaper report to the passenger list that has survived, and you might find there's more details in one or the other. There might be mention of servants in one or the other, and so on, or there might be a fuller detail of the passengers' names and that sort of thing. So checking newspapers can be quite a useful thing to do. The other thing that is available on Trove is the Shipping Gazette and the Sydney General Trade List from 1844 to 1860. So this would be another source to search. Now, finally, before I wind up today, I just want to remind you that there are some limitations on the actual records themselves. The records themselves, as we've seen, don't provide a huge amount of detail about the passengers. So it's always going to be difficult to try to narrow down your passenger unless you can find information like a good era of arrival or a ship name or something to help you narrow down that this person on this ship is your person. And secondly, the other thing to keep in mind is that some ships didn't actually lodge the returns that they were supposed to lodge. And we suspect that some returns may not have survived. But it is another area of research, and I do wish you luck in this area. And thank you for taking the time to listen to us today.